I think the main thing is it's going to give me probably more time for what I think will probably be the last stage of my research career and my writing career as an historian. So that will be one thing. But I think the other thing is that it gives also an opportunity to ensure, not only through trying to attract funding from the research councils, but also to attract the kind of funding for, if you like, future generations, not only of staff, but of research fellows and of PhD students, to attract the kind of philanthropy that we've already been successful in with the foundation of the centre, to create probably eventually a university chair in diaspora history, entirely externally funded. I think an especial weakness, and perhaps not so much at Edinburgh, but certainly across the sector, is that we haven't yet established, if you like, a cultural dynamic among our alumni, because that's essentially, it's the loyal alumni at Princeton, Harvard, Yale, Johns Hopkins, etc., who are actually the main source of university funding. I mean, I was in Princeton 2 years ago, and the Director of Development told me that one of the problems is they're actually running out of projects. Not of funding, but of projects to actually allocate the funding to. And it'd be wonderful if we got to that extent. So I kind of see changes going on, but it's going to be very challenging in the short run. And I think in the medium term in particular, the way I approach this is by establishing personal networks among those people outside the walls, if you like, outside the academy, who have got not only the financial wherewithal, but I've got a sympathetic cultural interest in what we do within the university. I mean, all the big political, historical identity issues are up for debate. And so the profile, certainly the sort of things that I do, if you like, my trade, is much higher than it was 20 years ago. Much, much higher. The past is contested territory. And the past affects the way we feel in the present. Not necessarily the reality of the past, but how we perceive the past, the myth. And again, to give you an example, one of the most recent texts, particularly on the Scottish impact overseas, is a book by an American scholar called Arthur Herman. It's called The Scottish Enlightenment. And the subtitle gives it away: How Western Europe's Poorest People Invented Our World and Everything in It. This is about the Scot. I've heard so many ministers in the current government quote from that book. And I mean, I think most professional scholars would regard it, and I select my words carefully here, as exaggerated. Okay? I actually call it the Burden Supper School of Scottish History in my own writing. That is boosterism, exceptionalism. Here's to us wha's like us. And that's fascinating to me, because in the 1960s, 1970s, when the works of the historian John Preble were very popular, Culloden, the Highland Clearances, and Glencoe, there was almost a kind of victim mentality. We're now moving to being a much more self-confident nation. We now want to hear a bit more about the great deeds of the Scots, both at home and abroad. So if you see it in terms of a portrait of the past, the different political parties, the different individual politicians can select that, because they have the big advantages. They are not constrained by the rules of my discipline. They can use anything that they find in the texts. There is no doubt that it is, if you like, a valid choice. It's not an invalid or an irrational choice. Whether it's the best choice, of course, is an entirely different matter. A few weeks ago, I was giving an after-dinner speech at the House of Commons, and I was sitting beside a very well-known politician, and he said, "You know, Tom, we don't know where you stand," and he was thinking of the constitutional issue. And I said, well, there might be some point where because obviously I've my personal political beliefs, there might be some point when I, quote, come out, unquote, but it certainly won't be at the moment. So if you look then at the big question, in this increasingly dangerous world, especially economically, Will the Scottish people look for the armoured plate, such as it is, because the armoured plate is steadily being eroded, of the British state? Or will they think the sort of things that are going on in London and this retreat, or similar retreat from Europe, we can go our own way and be better off? But then the nagging at the back of the mind will be Ireland, Iceland, smaller countries in Europe like Greece. And this makes it, especially since the debate has not yet been joined. You know, there hasn't been any clear definition of what in an interdependent world independence is. And on the other hand, there's not been any clear definition about what maximum devolution is. Before I got the offer from the principal of the university to think about coming back, I was seriously thinking about simply going to the house in Mull and disciplining crofters, like an 18th or 19th century landowner. But there is one piece of unfinished business, and it's one of these things that's still on the agenda in Scotland: Scottish sectarianism. We know that a lot of this is orientated or rooted in Irish Catholic and Protestant migration in the 19th and early 20th century and the long-term effects of that. But Scotland is the only jurisdiction in the world where the Irish settled: North America, South Africa, Australasia, England, which has, in the year 2011, an anti-sectarian strategy and anti-sectarian laws at governmental level. Why? I've always been interested in that question. That's the thing that's driven me as an historian. Not interest in the past for its own sake, but what the past throws up in terms of problems, puzzles, conundrums, and paradoxes. And this is an unsolved issue. I mean, I do speak about it to the media, but when I do speak about it, I'm not entirely convinced that what I'm saying is getting to the root of the problem. So that might be a useful end-of-life experience.
This production is copyright The University of Edinburgh.